There are all those rock and roll myths about life on the road, particularly those requests that bands will make of venues where in the dressing room there has to be a particular brand of bottled water, or a floor length mirror, or chicken wings from their favorite restaurant 2 towns away. And as we imagine life on the road, staying in hotel after hotel or sleeping night after night on a tour bus, a few luxury items are reasonable. But there is one particular request that looms large in rock and roll lore, where Van Halen, that band with big hair and spandex from the 80s, would request that every venue put in the dressing room a large bowl of brown M&Ms. That someone had to sit there and pick out all the other colored M&Ms. It is absurd. But David Lee Roth, lead singer of Van Halen, in his memoir says that this request had an ulterior motive. That when Van Halen would pull up to a venue, they had with them 9 18-wheelers full of equipment, whether it was special lighting or pyrotechnics. So their contract was rather long, with all these technical specifications that if they were not followed, they caused severe safety hazards. And they discovered that so many venues would sign that contract without reading a word. One time, they arrived to a venue and they discovered that they did not read the weight requirements for the stage. And if they set up all of their equipment during the show, the stage would have collapsed. And one way that they tested whether a venue read the contract or not was to put in this request for a bowl of brown M&Ms. That if they walked into the dressing room and there were no M&Ms, they knew to go looking for safety hazards. It wasn't about this large, maniacal, rock and roll ego. It was about risk management. That what they were doing was more than what they were actually doing. And oftentimes, when we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus is doing more than he is actually doing. It's just hard for us to see. And it was the same for the disciples. They were traveling with him throughout the region of Galilee. Jesus started to talk about how the Son of Man will be betrayed and how the Son of Man will be killed. And after 3 days, the Son of Man will rise again. But they did not understand what he was talking about. The title, Son of Man, is linked to the salvation of God. And when they envisioned salvation, they imagined a throne, not a cross. They pictured victory, not betrayal. And we see this misunderstanding in the evidence of when Jesus catches them as they're traveling to Capernaum, arguing about who is the greatest among us. That they wanted to stand on the podium of victory with Jesus. But Jesus says, the first is last of all and servant of all. And then he points at a child and says, whoever welcomes this child welcomes me. And even in a world that cherishes children and holds them in such high regard, we struggle to see the connection between welcoming children and welcoming Jesus. That when we pull up a chair to celebrate a tea party, sipping on tea that's not actually there, trying on a crown that doesn't actually fit, and introducing ourselves to all of the stuffed animals in the room, we would say how sweet and wonderful and caring all of that is. But it would be hard for us to explain how that is similar to spending time with Jesus. But Jesus is trying to point out how gentleness, humility, and mercy connect us to God. And it's why the book of James invites us to gentleness, humility, and mercy. But the church can fail to see this connection when it tries to be relevant. You know, like the number one song on pop radio, where everyone is attracted to it and listening to it. That the church wants to grab people's attention, and for good reason. We want to share the love of God. We want to invite others to join us. We want to expand the mission of the church. But in the wisdom of the first will be last, and servant of all. We're not called to be relevant. As Andrew Root and Blair Bertrand say, we are called to resonate. Relevance grabs people's attention. But gentleness, humility, and mercy resonate with us. They strike a much deeper chord inside of us, and they draw us closer to the steadfast love of Christ that we are to resonate with others. It is a willingness to be with them, to walk alongside of them, to listen to their stories, to gather around the table with others. It is why spending time with children is like spending time with Jesus. And it's recognizing that every person is a child of God. As a sculptor, Michelangelo created the Pietà at St. Peter's Church in Vatican City. It is a masterpiece. And a Pietà is any sculpture of Mary, the mother of Jesus, holding Jesus after the crucifixion. But that is not the only Pietà that Michelangelo created. Later in his life, he created another, lesser known Pietà that was meant for his tomb. And it now resides in the Museum of Florence, and it is quite beautiful. It is slightly different Not only is it Mary, the mother of Jesus, holding Jesus after the crucifixion, but also Mary Magdalene and Nicodemus surrounding them both. He created it around his 80th birthday, a time when he was looking back over the course of his life. And perhaps that is why he put his face on Nicodemus's face in the sculpture, identifying with him. Nicodemus, that Pharisee, wrestling with what it meant to be changed from above by the ways of Jesus, where the first is last and servant of all. That perhaps Michelangelo was coming to a deeper understanding of the gentleness, humility, mercy, of the steadfast love of Christ, where it is not about standing on a podium of victory, but rather holding Jesus after the crucifixion. Across from this Pietà on the wall of the museum is a poem penned by Michelangelo later from his life, where he writes, "The course of my life has brought me now through a stormy sea in a frail ship to the common port where, landing, we account for every deed, wretched or holy, so that finally I see how wrong the fond illusion was that made art my idol and my king, leading me to want what harmed me. My amorous fancies, once foolish and happy, what sense have they now that I approach two deaths, the first of which I know is sure, the second threatening? Let neither painting nor carving any longer calm my soul, turned to that divine love, who to embrace us opened his arms upon the cross." It sounds like Michelangelo recognized that what Jesus was doing was more than what he was actually doing, and that it changes us, and that it resonates with others, where the first is last and servant of all, and where maybe, just maybe, what we are doing is more than what we are actually doing as well. Amen.